This video is brought to you by Ground News. One of the big stories of last year's presidential election in the US was the swing amongst young voters. Having voted overwhelmingly Democratic at every presidential election since Obama, in 2024, young voters, i.e. those aged between 18 and 29, were basically split 50-50 between Harris and Trump, with young men breaking heavily for Trump. However, in the past couple of weeks, Trump's approval ratings have declined, and when you dig into the data, it turns out he's seen a particularly steep fall with young voters. So in this video, we're going to have a look at why Gen Z are apparently turning on Trump, and what this means for American politics going forward. Who's the best politician right now? Hear our thoughts and argue with us on our podcast, The World Leader Leaderboard. Find it over on the TLDR Podcast YouTube channel or in your favourite podcast app. So let's start by just reminding ourselves of quite how dramatically young people swung to Trump in 2024. For the past couple of decades, young people have generally voted Democrat at presidential elections. In 2008, Obama enjoyed a ridiculous 34-point lead with voters aged 18 to 30. And while that lead declined over time, Biden still enjoyed a massive 25-point lead with the same cohort in 2020. According to the AP Votecast, Biden won 61% of voters aged between 18 and 29, while Trump won just 36% of this cohort. This was by far and away his largest lead with any age group. Biden had a 12-point lead with voters aged between 30 and 44, and then a 3-point deficit with voters over 44. This essentially means that Biden's victory in 2020 was driven by voters under 44, and especially by voters under 30. Unfortunately for the Democrats, at the 2024 election, these young voters, and especially the 18 to 29 cohort, swung dramatically towards Trump. Again, according to the AP Votecast, in 2024, Harris won 51% of 18 to 29-year-olds, only 4 points more than Trump, who won 47%. This 21-point swing was by far and away the biggest swing between 2020 and 2024 for any age cohort. For context, 30 to 44-year-olds went for Harris by 3 points, a 5-point swing. 45 to 64-year-olds went for Trump by 6 points, a 3-point swing, and the over 65s went for Trump by 4 points, a 1-point swing. There was also a dramatic gender divide in this cohort, which we've covered in previous videos. Young women went for Harris by 18 points, while young men, who voted overwhelmingly for Biden in 2020, went for Trump by 13 points. However, since Trump's return to office, young voters' opinion of him has soured dramatically. According to the most recent Pew Research poll, for instance, which was published in late April and had a relatively large sample size of around 3,500 respondents, Trump's net approval rating had fallen from -4 at the start of his term to -19 last month, with 40% of respondents saying they approved of how Trump was handling the presidency and 59% saying they disapproved. For comparison, in February, Pew found that 47% of Americans approved of how Trump had handled the presidency, and 51% disapproved. This is obviously a pretty massive decline in and of itself, but what makes it even more remarkable is that Trump was faring particularly badly with young voters. Amongst 18 to 29-year-olds, for instance, Trump had a net approval rating of -27, with 63% saying they disapproved of how he was doing, and just 36% saying they approved. Other polls have shown a similar trend. According to analysis by data journalist G. Elliott Morris, if you average all polls published in April and then break them down by age cohort, you can see that Trump is faring particularly badly with younger voters. Amongst 18 to 29-year-olds, he has a net approval rating of -27, compared with -14 with 30 to 44-year-olds, -1 with 45 to 64-year-olds, and -7 with the over 65s. If you compare these numbers to what we saw at the ballot box in 2024, this implies that Trump has seen a far steeper decline with 18 to 29-year-olds than any other cohort. So, what's going on here? Why have young people apparently soured on Trump so fast? Well, no one knows for sure, but we can offer at least 3 possible explanations. The first is the economy. Young people in the US are poorer than other age cohorts, but also disproportionately likely to invest what money they do have in stocks and other financial assets. 58% of Gen Z get into investing before they get into the workforce, way more than previous generations, and they're disproportionately likely to invest in riskier assets like stocks and crypto. This means young people were particularly exposed to the economic consequences of Trump's tariffs, which roiled stock markets and put a drag on the American economy. Polling suggests that young voters are also particularly wary of Trump's economic policies. The latest Harvard Institute of Politics Youth poll, for instance, found that 18 to 30-year-olds overwhelmingly disapprove of tariffs, with 56% of respondents saying they opposed inflation-inducing tariffs and just 19% saying they supported them. That same poll found that young voters were even more disapproving of Trump's plan to displace Palestinians out of Gaza and let the US take control of the Strip, with just 14% of young people saying they approved of the idea. This is another reason that young voters disapprove of Trump at the moment. Young people are generally less pro-Israel than older generations, and therefore more likely to disapprove of Trump's Gaza policy. According to Pew polling from February, for instance, younger Americans are more likely to both sympathise with Palestinians, describe Israel's assault on Gaza as unacceptable, and view Palestinian people favourably. More generally, there's a fair bit of polling suggesting that young Americans are more isolationist than older generations, which might be one of the reasons they went for Trump at the last election, given Trump campaigned on a promise to negotiate world peace and draw down America's international military footprint. So far, however, Trump's peace efforts in Gaza and Ukraine have failed. He's threatened to annex various nearby territories, and he's continued bombing countries like Somalia and Yemen, which will all presumably disappoint younger, more isolationist-minded voters. But maybe the simplest and most persuasive explanation is that young people just really don't like the status quo, which makes them instinctively anti-incumbent. This would explain why they voted for Biden, pivoted towards Trump, and are rapidly souring on Trump now that he's actually in power. Again, there's polling to support this hypothesis. That Harvard Youth poll we referenced a second ago also found that 16% of under 30s said that they're doing well financially, and just 15% believe the country is heading in the right direction. Furthermore, a report from the Springtide Research Institute last year found that less than half of under 25s identify with one of the two big parties, which might explain why the youth vote is apparently so volatile. This is clearly a complex and nuanced story though, and as such there's plenty more to read about this online, with 30 sources reporting on this Pew poll alone. The issue is, how can you be sure that what you're reading isn't hugely biased? Well, that's a problem we face when making these videos too. And luckily, that's where this week's sponsor, Ground News, comes in. For this story in particular, they've identified that there are at least 9 left-leaning and 2 right-leaning sources reporting on it. In fact, in addition to this, they've also shown the main differences in headlines among left-leaning and right-leaning outlets, with left-leaning outlets generally using more sensationalist language and focusing on the economic consequences of Trump's tariffs, while right-leaning outlets focus solely on the numbers and the fact that the same poll shows that Democrats are still less popular than Republicans. We're able to do that because of our sponsor, Ground News, whose incredible website and app lets you discover the news and pulls back the curtain on media bias. That's because every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the source's reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organisations. But one of the best parts of the app is their blind spot feed. It presents you with stories and articles that haven't been reported on by one side of the aisle or the other, helping you better break out of your media bubble and discover what those on the other side of the political spectrum are really saying. This is all in addition to the biased distribution we mentioned earlier, and together these fantastic features help you to figure out exactly who's behind the stories you're reading and what agenda they may have. Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I think an app like this will only become more essential as the media landscape continues to evolve. If you're interested in everything that Ground News has to offer, you can get 40% off the Unlimited Access Vantage plan using the link in the description or by scanning the QR code. This offer is only available here, so make sure you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.